I am Pam Fox and I'm streaming live on YouTube. Welcome back to my Bible study where we're going through the book of Genesis. Today we are in chapter 29. So last time we left off telling the story of Jacob. So really this is the story of the beginnings of the Israelite nation, starting out with Abraham and his wife Sarah, then with their son Isaac, and now Isaac's son Jacob. And we're going to see today that Jacob is going to have many sons, and really this Israelite nation began with Abraham, the promise, the covenant. It was with Abraham, but it was also with his offspring. And today we're going to really start to see that take off and play out through Jacob. We're actually going to get through this chapter and a couple of verses in chapter 30, because when it starts to talk about the sons of Jacob, it's split up for some reason between these two chapters. So just really quick as a recap, last time we left off, Jacob, he had stolen the birthright from his twin brother Esau. He had stolen the blessing from his twin brother Esau, and Esau vowed to kill Jacob as soon as their dad dies, which isn't going to happen until quite a little bit later. But Esau was very angry, and so in his anger, he vowed, I'm going to kill my brother when my dad dies. As soon as my dad dies, he's toast. So his mom and dad decide, Jacob's mom and dad decide to send Jacob away because Esau is so angry, to cool off perhaps, but they also send him away to get a bride. And this is exactly how Jacob's father Isaac got his bride. Jacob's grandfather Abraham sent his right-hand man to his homeland to find his son Isaac a bride. He went there, he found Rebekah, he brought her back. We talked about that a few weeks ago. Now we're going to see the same thing, similar, with Jacob, only nobody's sending a proxy to find a wife for Jacob. They're just sending Jacob away to the homeland of Abraham. Again, to give Esau time to cool off, and for him to find a bride amongst their family, which was apparently common and custom to take a bride that was a relative. And we're going to see today that Jacob is going to take a bride that is actually, he's going to take two brides. Well, technically he's going to take four, but he's going to take these two brides, these sisters, who are literally technically his cousins, his first cousins. Their father and his mother are brother and sister. So yes, it was a common thing to marry within the family. It was especially important, remember, to Abraham for his son to not take a wife among the pagan people that lived there where they were, but to go back to their homeland and get somebody, a wife from their family. I'm going to assume part of that reason was because Abraham wanted his son to marry a God-fearing woman and not a pagan woman. He understood that that was important. So last time we saw that. We also saw Esau, Jacob's twin brother. He also got married. He married an Ishmaelite. And we saw Jacob having this dream, Jacob's ladder, where we saw he saw in this vision a ladder going up to heaven with angels coming up and down. He saw God at the top, and God confirmed the covenant with Jacob, the same covenant that's been, let's just read it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham thy father, and the God of Isaac. The land whereon thou liest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed. And thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth, which means a lot of people, and so many you can't count them. And if you think about it, the Israelite nation was the chosen people of God, and yeah, they exponentially exploded. There were a lot of people in that original Jewish nation. It's hard to tell how many Jews there are right now in the world, because the Jewish people only went back to their homeland in the mid-40s after World War II. So we can have a consensus of how many Jews are there. But there are Jews still living all around the world. All around the world, there are still Jews. So even today, I would say it would be difficult to count the number of Jews. But additionally, from the Jewish nation was born the Christian nation, right? Jesus was a Jew, and his life and his ministry, out of that was born the Christian, not a nation, but the Christian religion, you could say, the Christian doctrine, the belief of the gospel message that God made a way for all all people could be a part of God's kingdom, a part of his family. They could live, they could be servants of Christ if they would believe in Christ Jesus, what he did at the cross, which was to die so that we could live eternally. And so, anyway, getting back to this, they talk about the seed shall be as the dust of the earth. The Jewish nation was born, they grew exponentially, and then the Christian nation was born out of that. And of course, it's still alive and kicking today. There are many facets of of the Christian religion. You know, you've got your Catholics and your Protestants and on and on and on. But the one thing that all those people hopefully have in common is their love of Jesus and their belief in the gospel, that God made a way for all of us to have everlasting life through Christ Jesus and what he did at the cross. And so here God is confirming this covenant with Jacob. He says, thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and thou shalt spread abroad to the west and to the east and the north and the south, and in thee and in thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Remember, that's talking about Jesus. Through this line, through this bloodline, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and so on and so on and so on. We're going to see today Judah is one of those 12 sons of Jacob. It's through the line of Judah will come the line of kings, including King David and King Jesus himself. So this blessing, in thee and in thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed, that's talking about Jesus. It is through Jesus that all the families of the earth will be blessed. What's the blessing? The blessing is salvation. The blessing is everlasting life with God in his presence, in his place, right? The blessing is to finally live in that place that we all long for, the place where there's no war and no crime, no lying, no sorrow, no disease. To live in that place where we all serve God, we understand God, we live for God. He sets the standard. This is how, you're my people, this is how you live. And we say, yes, we're in agreement with that. We're not going to commit adultery. We're not going to murder. We're not going to lie. We're going to obey you and live for you. That's the final frontier. That's what we're working towards. Right now, we're still in this phase where we're here. We're in these earthly bodies. We are sinful. We break God's law. We try not to, and we do our best we can, but we still we live in these imperfect bodies. But God said that he is perfecting us. He is perfecting us. So that's coming. It won't happen on this side of death. It'll happen on the other side of death, which should give us an anticipation and a hope for what's ahead instead of a fear and a dread of dying. Once you can come to terms with this and understand that there's only good things beyond this life, you'll fear death a whole lot less, and you'll actually look forward to what's on the other side. And you won't have this daily fear of, death and the unknown beyond this life. And I don't have all the answers. I don't know all the answers. This is just my faith in what God has told us in the Word. And it gives me peace, and it gives me hope. So that was last time. And then finally, Jacob made a vow to God, basically saying, I will be yours. You will be my God. I will be yours. And it's the same vow that we should be making today in the year 2022. God, you are my God. I am yours. You are my God. I will serve you. And that's the vow that Jacob made after he saw this vision. And then he's going to go into Haran and find himself a wife. So let's go ahead and look at that. This is probably one of the most, this chapter in the Bible, what would you call it? It's got family dysfunction. It's got scandal. It's got cringe. It's got a lot of that stuff. It's almost like, grabbing your popcorn and sitting down and watching a movie that's just, it's got all of this stuff, So let's go ahead and go through it. I'm in the King James. We'll start out chapter 29, verse 1. Then Jacob went on his journey and came into the land of the people of the east. And he looked, and behold, a well in the field, and lo, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it, for out of that well they watered the flocks, and a great stone was upon the well's mouth. And thither were all the flocks gathered. That word thither means there. And there were all the flocks gathered, and they rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the sheep and put the stone again upon the well's mouth in its place. All right, let's stop. So Jacob is, or the author here is describing what Jacob sees when he comes into Haran. He sees a well. He sees sheep. He's describing how this well works. You know, there would have been a hole in the ground and water and a bucket that would have lowered down, or a vessel of some sort. Then maybe some shoring up around that hole, and maybe a covering so that people don't fall into it and animals don't fall into it, or people don't, you know, go to the bathroom in it, or that kind of a thing. It's a well to draw out clean water for the people of the nearby town and for the livestock. So he's describing this well, and it should strike a chord in a memory of something we talked about just a few weeks ago. When his fathers, well, again, it was Abraham's right-hand man, was sent here to Haran to find a bride for his son Isaac, Isaac being Jacob's father. This is the same place where Jacob's father Isaac got his bride, there at the well. It's where Rebekah was first seen. It's where this man that Abraham sent, this facilitator he sent to go on a mission to bring home this bride for Isaac. It was at a well. Now, I don't know if it was the same well. It doesn't say that. But it's describing this well, and it's describing how the well works. And in verse 4, Jacob says, he says unto them, my brethren. So there's these people here at the well. He says, my brethren, whence be ye? And they said, of Haran we be. So in other words, brethren, that just means, hey guys, where are you from? And they say, we're from Haran. Verse 5, and he said unto them, know ye Laban, the son of Nahor? And they said, we know him. So he's just asking, you know, oh, you're from Tehran. You don't happen to know Laban, do you? And they're like, yeah, we know him. Verse 6, and he said unto them, is he well? And they said, he is well. And behold, Rachel his daughter cometh with the sheep. So they're having this chat. He's like, well, how's he doing? You know, how is Laban? And they're like, oh, he's good. And in fact, here comes his daughter Rachel to water her sheep. Verse 7, and he said, this is Jacob talking, and he said, lo, it is yet high day, neither is it time that the cattle should be gathered together, sheep, and go and feed them. He's telling these guys, these brethren that he's having a chat with, as Rachel is coming in the distance with the sheep, he's telling them, you should go water. He says, water ye the sheep and go. Verse 8, and they said, we cannot, until all the flocks be gathered together, and till they roll the stone from the well's mouth, then we water the sheep. So for whatever reason, Jacob's telling these guys that he's chatting with, you should go water her sheep. And they're like, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to wait. These were probably other shepherds, possibly. They were waiting until all of the livestock could be gathered together, and they would pull up vessel after vessel after vessel of water from the well and fill the troughs so that all the livestock could eat and drink. And for whatever reason, these people, whether they're shepherds or whatever, they're saying, no, we're not going to do that. We're not doing that now. We're going to do it later. Maybe it was their custom. Maybe they were procrastinating. I'm not really sure, but Jacob is telling them, you go water her sheep. And they say no. Verse 9. And while he yet spake with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she kept them. And it came to pass when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother. Now that word brother, when we look that up in the Strongs, it's a word that is synonymous with kin or relatives. We know that Jacob is not Laban's brother. Jacob is Laban's technically nephew, okay? But here it uses the word brother. It's just synonymous with the word relative. So let's read it again. And it came to pass when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter's brother or relative, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. So as he sees Rachel approaching, we're going to see later that it was love at first sight. It was total and complete. He tells these guys, go water her sheep. They say no, and he says, I'll do it. And so he goes, he rolls away the stone, he draws up vessel after water, fills the trough. I mean, we don't know how many sheep she has, but if it was a lot, it would have been multiple times in and out of the well, carrying that vessel, filling the troughs. And she would have been standing there just be like, that's a job. What is this guy doing? Um, does he like me? I don't know. That's kind of how I imagine it when I try to, paint a picture in my head. I mean, imagine if you were Rachel, just like, this is my job. Who is this guy? I've never seen this guy before. Why is he watering my sheep? Where are his sheep? Why is he even here? Maybe he likes me. Verse 11. And Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and he wept. He wept. And that word, when we look it up, it means to bewail, to moan, to cry out. So he didn't shed a tear. He lifted up his voice and wept after he kissed her. Now, if someone were to do that today in the year 2022, we would probably think they were a little bit crazy, right? Like somebody could just start screaming and crying and moaning and wailing. What is up with that? But that's what he did. And in verse 12 it says, and Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's brother, relative, and that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father. So now she knows who this person is. And she's obviously excited because she father. She was Laban's daughter. Laban was the brother of Rebekah. And there was this one day, but probably before Rachel was even born, likely, um, that this dignitary came into their presence, told Laban that he wanted to take Rebekah, his daughter, to marry this man Isaac, who was Abraham's son. And these people would have known very well who Abraham was. You have to remember that these people in these Bible times, they didn't have TV and social media and this access to world events and current events and all of that. They would have sat and talked and shared stories of their heritage over and over and over. So when Rachel heard that this man, Jacob, was her father's sister, Aunt Rebecca, who she probably never met, Rebecca's son, she knew exactly who they were dealing with. She would have known the story of this dignitary coming in and sweeping away her Aunt Rebecca, giving her gold and rings and raiment and gifts for the family and saying, do you want to come now or come in 10 days? And she said, I will go now to meet my husband, that, sight unseen. She was excited about it. So it says, Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's brother and that he was Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father. Verse 13, and it came to pass when Laban heard the tidings of Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him. So Jacob's still back here hanging out at the well. It says he embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. And he told Laban all these things, that is Jacob. So he tells the story. He probably told him about the birthright and the blessing and how his twin brother Esau wants to kill him and how his parents said, go to Haran, find a wife, hang out there. So he told Laban everything. I met your daughter, Rachel, at the well, which was exactly how his sister Rebekah met her husband at the well. So he and told Laban all these things. Verse 14, and Laban said to him, surely thou art my bone and my flesh. And he abode with him the space of a month. So Jacob stays there and hangs out with Laban and his family for a month. And again, in these Bible days, you wouldn't just hang out and mooch off of a family, kind of like people do now. You would have gone to work. There was plenty to be done, taking care of the livestock and the land and the cooking and the cleaning and just the hunting, all of that, the gardening. It was just a constant cycle of work, and it required a lot of people in the household to do all that work, especially the more things that you had, right? The more land, the more livestock, the more family, you required more people to really do all of that work. So you would have gone to work. So here's Jacob living with Laban for 1 month. And in verse 15 it says, and Laban said unto Jacob, because thou art my brother, in other words, because you're a relative, you're not just some stranger, you're not just some unknown servant that works for me, you're my family. So because thou art my brother, shouldest thou therefore serve me for naught? Tell me, what shall thy wages be? So he's asking him, name your price. You're here, your family, you're working for me, name your price. And of course, in those days, it wouldn't have been like a paycheck, like, I want this much money every month for, like a salary or anything like that. It would have been well, I want, that jewelry, or I want this amount of livestock, or I want this amount of land, or I really like those sandals, or it would have been, you know, name your price. It would have been, this is what I want from you. And let's see what Jacob wants from Laban. He says, tell me, what shall thy wages be? And Laban had two daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored. Now here we have this description of these two daughters. It says Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored. Now a lot of people say that Leah must have been homely because it says but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored. It doesn't say that she was homely, it says that she was. So it's hard to really get a better understanding of what that meant to describe a woman as being tender-eyed. The word tender means soft, so to have soft eyes. What I'm thinking here is Jacob looks at these two women and he says, Leah's okay, she's got nice eyes, but Rachel, oh, that Rachel, she's beautiful and well favored. She's the best. She's awesome. She's the one. It says, and Jacob loved Rachel. Remember, this was love at first sight. He watered her sheep, he kissed her, and he cried. He says, and Jacob loved Rachel and said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel, thy younger daughter. So he's telling Laban that he will serve him. He'll stay and work for him for 7 years in exchange for his daughter Rachel, which I find really interesting because he could have said, I want your daughter and I want her now. I want your daughter and I'll work for her for a month or a year or 2 years, but he says 7 years, which just blows my mind because usually, when you're in love with somebody, you want to get it going, you want to be with them, you want to marry them, you want to live your life with them and all of that stuff. He says, I'll work for her for 7 years. So I find that very curious. First off, so what does Laban says? What does Laban say? Verse 19. And Laban said, it is better that I give her to thee than that I should give her to another man. Abide with me. So he basically said, well, she's my daughter. She's beautiful. She's well favored. If she's going to go to anybody, I'd rather her go to you than someone else. That's basically what he says. And then he says, abide with me. So in a sense, in not chapter, this negotiation, he says, abide with me. It says in verse 20, and Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but a few days for the love he had to her. In other words, those 7 years flew by. They didn't seem like 7 years because you would think it would be the opposite, just like, okay, 5 years down, 2 to go, 6 years down, 1 to go. Oh my gosh, I can't wait another day. Flew by. They seemed unto him but a few days. Verse 21. And by the way, there's a lot of typology here if we look for it, but we're really just studying the surface, the story here, the history, what happened. We're not going to get into the typology, but if you read through this with typology lenses on, you'll start to notice different things here. Jacob said unto Laban, give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go in unto her. So in other words, the 7 years are up. Give me my wife. He's telling Laban, I want Rachel now. I worked for you for 7 years so that I may, it says, go in unto her. And you and I both know what that means. But it was a way of saying, so that I can consummate the marriage, so that we can get married, so that we can make it official, so that we can become one, the way originally intended marriage to be. Two people becoming. Here he's going to have 4 wives, and that's not God's plan, but God lets us live our lives, right? God allows us to live our lives. He intervenes. He answers prayer. He says yes and no to our prayers, yes or no. But he allows us to live our lives. And here, unfortunately, Jacob is in love with Rachel. And what happens next? And Laban gave unto his daughter Leah Zilpah, his maid, for a handmaid. So this was custom when a woman would get married. If they were from a family that was fairly well endowed, she would then acquire a handmaid to help get her family started, help her with child rearing, help her with the household, the gardening, the livestock, whatever. So now she was given this handmaid, Zilpah, Verse 25, and it came to pass that in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, what is this thou hast done unto me? Did not I serve with thee for Rachel? Wherefore then hast thou beguiled me? So this sounds so crazy and so unbelievably untrue. It's a hard pill to swallow. Laban, after 7 years of Jacob working for him, for his daughter Rachel, he decides he's going to give him Leah instead, and he doesn't tell him about it. Now, this is one of those things where you're like, well, how would he not know? How would he have sex with Leah and not know that it was Leah and not Rachel? Like, is he blind? Is he stupid? Was he drunk? Number one, it wouldn't have been uncommon for a woman to wear a veil on her wedding night, to have her face covered. Number two, it might have been very, very dark. It might have been a cloudy night when it happened. There were no moon, no stars, no candles, no lanterns, there in the tent. It might have been very dark. Leah was obviously in on it. Her father said, you're going to go and marry Jacob. And so she didn't say anything. She didn't say, oh, sorry, I'm Leah. Happy wedding night. So for whatever reason, somehow Jacob was, like he says, beguiled. He was tricked. And he consummated the marriage with Leah. All right. So verse 26. And Laban said, it must not be so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. So that's his excuse. Laban says, well, we give away our firstborn daughters before we give away the younger daughters. Leah has to get married first. Of course, there was no discussion of this. He just tricked Jacob into consummating the marriage with Leah. Verse 27, Laban goes on. He says, fulfill her week, and we will give thee this also for the service which thou shalt serve with me yet 7 other years. So he says, work for me another 7 years, and then you can have Rachel, the one you wanted. Verse 28, and Jacob did so, and fulfilled her week, and he gave him Rachel his daughter to wife also. And Laban gave to Rachel his daughter Bilhah his handmaid to be her maid. And he went in unto Rachel, and he loved also Rachel more than Leah, and served him yet 7 other years. I'm trying to find the part. It seems like there's a line in here where Laban, something about a feast. Hang on one second. Maybe we haven't gotten to that point yet. Okay, maybe we haven't gotten to that point yet. Or maybe I dreamt it. Okay. Like a wedding feast when they were finally getting married, which would have explained maybe, that he had too much to drink. Had those beer goggles on, and he didn't even realize that it was Leah instead of Rachel. Anyway, those are some kind of reasons why that can kind of make this story more believable, even though it is so incredibly hard to believe. That Jacob would have worked for Rachel, in love with Rachel, love at first sight Rachel, and then on their wedding night, he didn't even realize that it wasn't her. Okay, so, and the other thing too you have to realize is when Jacob and Laban made this agreement for Rachel, they were engaged. That was the engagement of Jacob and Rachel. And then he would work for those 7 years, but during those 7 years, there wouldn't have been a lot of hanky-panky. Rachel would have cooked for Jacob and served him, as well as the rest, served and cooked for the rest of the family. She would have been doing her female duties, so to speak. But they wouldn't have had an intimacy, where they knew each other. All right, so Laban gave to Rachel his daughter Bilhah, his handmaid, to be her maid. And he went in also unto Rachel, and he loved also Rachel more than Leah, and served with him yet 7 other years. So Jacob lived with Laban in his household for 21 years. The first 7 he was engaged to Rachel. The next 7 he was married to Leah, and those final 14 years he was married to Leah and Rachel. So engaged the first 7, married to Leah the second 7, and married to both women the final 14 years. Verse 31, it says, "And when the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren." So for whatever reason, God blessed Leah's ability to bear children, but he did not bless Rachel's ability to bear children. This whole thing to me is tragic and really hard to understand. It's one of those things like, well, where was God in all of this? Why did he allow Laban to trick Jacob? Why didn't he open up Rachel's womb? I mean, imagine the suffering that she went through. She was engaged to Jacob for 7 years, waiting to become his wife. And when those 7 years ended, Leah became Jacob's wife. Leah became her fiance's wife. Her sister became her fiance's wife. I mean, imagine the betrayal she would have felt from her father, from her sister, from Jacob, for not knowing who he was sleeping with. And then she had to live there in that household, knowing that Leah and Jacob were man and wife. Her sister and her fiance were married. They were sleeping together. They were having children. And then when Rachel marries Jacob, God doesn't open up her womb. It's one of those things you just have to look at and go, I trust that God knew what he was doing. And again, going back to God lets us live our lives. So Laban made a really bad choice that had really tragic consequences, but God allowed him to do it for whatever reason. Verse 32. Leah conceived and bare a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, okay, so this is going to be the fun part of today's Bible study. When I'm done, I'm going to read something. I'm going to read, so as we go through each of these children that are born, Jacob's sons, the son is born, and the author mentions their name, and he mentions why the mother named the child. Because remember, names during these Bible times had meaning, right? If you met me and I said my name is Pam, you would have known back then what Pam meant. All names had meaning. All names had meaning. And so when we go through, some of you maybe have heard of this before, but it's really cool, and I want to share it for those of you that haven't. When we go through the 12 sons of Jacob, and we write their names down in order, and then we write down the meaning of those names next to it, a miracle happens. And the miracle is that when we add in a few prepositions, those names, the meanings of those names create a story. And the story is the gospel message. So I'm going to read that to you when we're all done. But let's go ahead and finish this chapter and learn about these 12 sons of Jacob. So the first one was Reuben. And it says, Leah conceived and bare a son, and she called his name Reuben. For, she said, surely the Lord hath looked upon my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me. And the name Reuben means, behold, a son is born to us. That's what Reuben means. Verse 32 and verse 33. Or no. Yeah, verse 33. And she conceived again and bare a son, and said, because the Lord hath heard that I was hated, he hath therefore given me this son also. And she called his name Simeon. Simeon means the one who hears. The Lord hath heard that I was hated. 34. And she conceived a son, and said, now this time will my husband be joined unto me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore was his name called Levi, and Levi means attached. 35. And she conceived again, and bare a son, and she said, now I will praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah, and left bearing. So Judah, incidentally, is the line, again, of the 12 sons that the kings would come out of, including King David and King Jesus. It says, therefore she called his name Judah, and left bearing, which means after these 4 sons were born, she couldn't get pregnant again, for whatever reason. Okay, and so this is where we end chapter 29 and we go into chapter 30, but the story's not done yet, so let's go ahead and finish it. Verse 1, and when Rachel saw that she bare Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said unto Jacob, give me children or else I die. So here we have a little bit of drama. Rachel seems nice. And Jacob's anger was kindled, and he said, Am I in God's stead? Who hath withheld from thee the fruit of thy womb? In other words, what's not my fault that you're barren? Why are you mad at me? You should be mad at God, he's saying. Verse 3, And she said, Behold my maid Bilhah, go in unto her, and she shall bear upon my knees, that I may also have children to her. Now, I don't know if this was just custom back in the day, if you were barren, to have a surrogate. But we saw this before, right? We saw it with Abraham and Sarah. God said you're going to have a son, and 10 years went by, 20 years went by, and Sarah was like, you need to do it with my handmaid, because it's not happening with me. I'm an old woman. I've never had any children. I'm not going to have any children. So he had a baby with Hagar, the handmaid. And now here we see it again in the grandson of Abraham, here Jacob. Rachel's not having any children. She's not getting pregnant. And so she suggests, just like Sarah did, to have a child with the handmaid. And interestingly, if you'll notice, it says, Behold my maid Bilhah, go in unto her, and she shall bear upon my knees. Now, it's pretty commonly agreed upon that this means that this handmaid was a surrogate, and that this baby that would be born would belong to Rachel. It would belong to Rachel and Jacob. Just like today, if you were to get a surrogate, the surrogate has the baby, but it belongs to the mom and the dad that acquired that surrogate. And so Rachel would have been present there at the conception, and she would have been present there at the birth. And that's what she's talking about when she says, shall bear upon my knees. Rachel would be present there during the conception and during the birth of the baby, so that everyone in the room knows this is my baby. It's very, very tragic. I mean, I can't imagine what that would have been like for a handmaid. Maybe during the day they understood their place as a handmaid, that was something that might be asked of them, and they understood that this baby is not going to be mine, even though technically it is. It grew in their body. It's her baby, but she would have to give it up. And I can't even imagine how painful that would be. Although the handmaid would help raise that baby. In fact, the handmaid would probably be just as close to that baby as the mother. She would nurse it. She would have the milk. She would care for it, kind of like a nanny. If the mom is busy or tired, be like, okay, handmaid, take care of the baby. So she would have been present in the life of the baby. But I don't know, some of this stuff in these old Bible days, it's so heartbreaking. And I often wonder if it really was as heartbreaking for the people at the time as it seems like it would be, or if it was just life as usual as far as they were concerned. But let's go on. So verse 4, and she gave him Bilhah, her handmaid, to wife. So remember, it says it gave him the handmaid to wife. When we go back to the beginning of Genesis, when God brings together Adam and Eve, he says that they come together and become one flesh, that no one can separate. At this point in the story here in the middle of Genesis, we haven't had the introduction of God's law. The Ten Commandments are going to come later through Moses, after the nation of Israel has been born, right? There's millions and millions and millions of Israelites living there in slavery in Egypt before they are set free to go back to their promised land. And she gave Bilhah her handmaid, I lost track of my train of thought there. It'll probably come back to me in a minute, but let's just get back to verse 4. And she gave him Bilhah, her handmaid, to wife, and Jacob went in unto her. I remember now. Later through the Ten Commandments, we'll see God saying, thou shalt not commit adultery, which means that original Adam and Eve, man and wife, come together to form one and let no man separate. That's the way it was from the beginning. That's the ideal. That's the way God wants it. That's the way God says is best for you and for me. But I don't know that it was something that these people had a grasp of, because they haven't been given God's will or his law yet. Yes, they are God-fearing people, and they know a lot about God, what they've been handed down through certain people. But the birth of the prophets hasn't started yet. The life of Moses and the Ten Commandments haven't started yet. The Levitical priesthood has not begun yet. All of that is going to be born into and with the birth of the Israelite nation. It'll all start later. It hasn't happened yet. So I'm not making excuses for Jacob and the fact that he's got 4 wives. Abraham, his grandfather, had his wife Sarah, and he also had a child with Hagar. I mean, this wasn't something that was uncommon, but it's not God's heart for us. It's God's heart for us to be with the one and to let no one separate. And so when Jacob starts to have these other connections, it causes trouble. You know, he's got this first wife, Leah, then he marries Rachel, and there's trouble in the household, of course. And then he brings on, he marries these handmaids. And when I say marry, you know, he's having children through them. And so that consummation is a marriage, so to speak. It's not like a marriage today where we buy an expensive dress and a ring and walk down the aisle and say, you now may kiss the bride. It's not that kind of marriage, but it was still a marriage. To consummate a relationship, even if you were just trying to have children, means that now this is your wife. And of course, Jacob only really considered Rachel to be his wife. She's the one he loved. She was beautiful and well favored. But technically he had 4 wives. So here we see, and she gave him Bilhah, her handmaid, to wife. And Jacob went in unto her, and Bilhah conceived, and bare Jacob a son. And Rachel said, God hath judged me, and hath also heard my voice, and hath given me a son. Therefore called she his name Dan. So here we have Leah has 4 sons. Then the handmaid has 1. Oh, 2. Verse Bilhah, Rachel's maid, conceived again and bare Jacob a second son. So the handmaid has 2 sons. And by the way, Dan means he judged. Judah means praise the Lord. Dan means he judged. Verse 8, and Rachel said, with great wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and I have prevailed. And she called his name Naphtali. So we have another son. His name is Naphtali, which means my struggle. Verse 9, and when Leah saw that she had left bearing, so Leah had the 4, and then that was it. She took Zilpah, her maid, and gave her Jacob to wife. So here we have now Jacob and 4 wives, Rachel, Leah, and the 2 handmaids. Verse 10, and Zilpah, Leah's maid, bare Jacob a son, and Leah said, a troop cometh, and she calleth his name Gad, which means good fortune. Now, I'm not sure why she says a troop cometh. I have no idea what that means, but his name means good fortune. Okay, verse 12, and Zilpah, Leah's maid, bare Jacob a second son, and Leah said, happy am I, for the daughters will call me blessed. And she called his name Asher, which means happiness. And Reuben went in the days of wheat harvest and found mandrakes in the field. Mandrakes are simply they would have been used to make baskets, to weave, to do weaving. So Reuben went in the days of the wheat harvest and found mandrakes in the field and brought them unto his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, give me, I pray thee, of thy son's mandrakes. And she said unto her, is it a small matter that thou hast taken my husband? So Leah's son Reuben brings back these mandrakes, and Rachel says she wants some of the mandrakes. And Leah, instead of saying, sure, you can have some, she says, is it a small matter that thou hast taken my husband? Remember, Leah married Jacob first. Although it was a scam, it was a trick, she married him first. And there's jealousy because Rachel is so beautiful and well loved, and Jacob loves her. And even though Leah is the one that's birthed 4 sons, and that's the other thing you have to remember, these women, they would have equated worth with birth, right? Like, if you couldn't have a baby, if you were barren, you would have considered yourself mediocre. You would have considered yourself worthless. And there would have been people that considered you worthless. And you wouldn't have known you were barren when you got married, right? You don't like get married knowing you're barren. You find out after you get married, and then you know, your husband might leave you, his family might reject you, you might, you know, hate yourself for being worthless, because as a woman, that's your job, is to have babies. Um, and so here is Leah. She's had 4 babies, and Rachel has had none. She's had none. And so Leah, you know, it would have been, both of them would have been so jealous. Leah's like, I've had these 4 sons, I've done everything, I've been a good wife, and yet my husband loves my sister. Rachel would have been like, you know, I'm a good wife, I've served my husband, he loves me, um, but I can't have any children, so I'm really useless. And there's my sister just popping out boys. And that's the other thing too. To give birth to boys was considered, you know, bravo. To have a daughter was like, congratulations. But a boy, and she's had 4 of them, and Rachel has had none. So anyway, getting back to these mandrakes, she says, is it a small matter that thou hast taken my husband? She goes on to say, and wouldest thou take away my son's mandrakes also? You already took my husband, now you want my son's mandrakes. And Rachel said, therefore he shall lie with thee tonight for thy son's mandrakes. She cuts a deal. She basically says, you can have the mandrakes. What does she say? Which sister is it? So it's Leah that has the mandrakes. And she's the one that's going to get to sleep with Jacob tonight, right? Because she cuts this deal with Rachel. A night with Jacob for the mandrakes. Which tells you that Jacob probably more commonly sleeps with Rachel. Like, that's probably the default bed. Obviously, he's slept with these other women in their beds, but Rachel's the one he loves. And he wants her to have children, obviously. So she's the default bed. So Rachel says, you know, you can sleep with Jacob tonight for the mandrakes, basically. She must really want those mandrakes. Or maybe she just wants a night off. I don't know. It's just more craziness. But so, okay, verse 16. And Jacob came out of the field in the evening, and Leah went out to meet him and said, I can just see her rushing out, Jacob, 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 thou must come in unto me, for surely I have hired thee with my son's mandrakes. And he lay with her that night. So she rushes out to meet him as he's coming home from a long, hard day of work, and saying, you're sleeping with me tonight, Jacob, because your wife traded you for some mandrakes. All right, so verse 17, and God hearkened unto Leah, and she conceived. She sleeps with Jacob once after she's been barren for a period of time. She had the 4 boys. She was stagnant for a period of time. She sleeps with us once. She gets pregnant, bears Jacob a 5th son for her. This is the 5th son for Leah. And Leah said, God hath given me my hire, because I have given my maiden to my husband. And she called his name Issachar. And Issachar means reward, and that word hire means, in the Hebrew, it means reward. So God hath given me my hire, because I have given my handmaid to my husband. Now, I don't think that's true. That's what she thought. I don't think that's what God thought. I don't think she was rewarded for giving her handmaid to her husband. That's not what God wants. We know that when we go back to the very beginning of Genesis. And we see that God meant for a husband to marry his wife, to consummate the marriage, to become one, and to never be separated, which means to not commit adultery, to not be, you know, leaving your wife and joining with other women. And same goes for the wife, of course. Verse 19, and Leah conceived again, and bare Jacob the 6th son. And Leah said, God hath endued me with good dowry, now will my husband dwell with me. That's hopeful thinking. This is Leah talking. Now will my husband dwell with me, which again tells you that Jacob lived with Rachel, probably in a tent, because I have borne him 6 sons. So here we have the 6th son with Leah, which is Zebulon, whose name means honor. Leah said, God had endued me with good dowry, and she called his name Zebulon. Verse 21, and we're almost done. And afterward, she bare a daughter and called her name Dinah. So Jacob has 12 sons, and he has the one daughter. 12 sons, one daughter. 13 children altogether. No more after that. 12 sons, one daughter. Incredible. It says in verse 22, and there's just this little mention of Dinah. We'll hear about her later, but there's this little mention of Dinah. And God remembered Rachel, and God hearkened to her and opened her womb. So now God opens her womb. Makes no sense. Whoopsie. I just clicked right out of Genesis. Let's get back. Genesis 30. And God remembered Rachel and hearkened her and opened her womb. And she conceived and bare a son and said, God hath taken away my reproach. And she called his name Joseph and said, we're almost done. Hold on, because I'm going to read that gospel message to you at the end. The Lord shall add to me another son. And it came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph. So Rachel finally has a baby, and it's Joseph. That's the same Joseph in the coat of many colors. We're going to read all about him here in the book of Genesis coming up. That it says, Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said unto Laban, send me away that I may go into mine own place, into my country. So finally, Jacob's like, after all these years, I believe it was 21 altogether, he wants to go back to the promised land, back to where he came from, where his father Isaac and Rebekah are, where his brother Esau is. He wants to take his family, and he wants to go. Verse 26, give me my wives and my children, for whom I have served thee, and let me go. For thou knowest my service which I have done for thee. And Laban said unto him, I pray thee, I have found favor in thy. And I cover all of this next week. So I'm going to stop there. Here we have Rachel. She gives birth to her first son. We're going to see next week, she's also going to give birth to her second son. She's going to have two sons, Joseph and Benjamin. And Benjamin means son of righteousness. So when we read all of these names in order and we throw in a few prepositions and verbs, this is what we come up with. Behold, a son is born unto us, one who hears us and became attached unto us. Praise the Lord. He judged our struggle and brought us good fortune, happiness, reward, and honor. He added us to his family and called us the righteousness. So that's what you get when you take all of those names, the 12 sons of Jacob, you write down their meanings in order, and they give us the gospel message. Pretty cool, I think. All right, guys, it's getting late, and I got to go to work. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope God blesses you this week, and I thank you for being here.